make a difference. My journey with Fab NHS started on looking at an initiative on falls. And the whole concept behind this was just looking at making one little change. We looked at how can we reduce the falls, but actually not increasing the workflow for the nurses on the ward. How can we embed it? So we concentrated on one little thing. Does the patient have a call bell? And we focused on that for a month. Does every patient have a call bell? And that's where we focused. Looking after that, we then looked at slipper socks, and we just introduced a new thing every month, and that was just bringing in one little thing, and it dropped our levels of falls by about 35% in that space of a month. So the little things do make a difference, which is going to link us up beautifully to Dr. McCabe, who's just joined us, who is coming to us from the Worcestershire Hospitals NHS Trust.
G'day everyone. Hello everyone. G'day Dave. Dave Stanley, I see you up there. Nice to see your face up there as well. Sorry everyone. So I'm Mike McCabe. I'm one of the consultant anaesthetists. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about #CallMe, addressing patients by their preferred name. So this is a project which I kind of started about from a case that I was involved in 2 years ago now. And it's the background cases I'll tell you about. As a consultant anaesthetist, I was doing a trauma list. And off the hospital system, I had a list of patients to go and see. And included on this list was a young adolescent girl who I'll call Mary, who was, I went down to see Mary. She had a fractured arm or a leg. It's irrelevant what she had, really. And I went and saw her and I said, hello, Mary, I'm Dr. McCabe. I'm one of the sleep doctors. I'm going to just talk to you about what's going to happen today. And I did this after picking up her notes, checking the consent form, asking the ward clerk where the patient was, checking with the patient that this was young Mary, and Mary kind of gave me a cold, hard stare and basically said, not going to really talk to you today, effectively. And I said, Mary, you're having a bad day. That's okay. Am I right in assuming to this lady that was sitting next to Mary, are you Mary's mum or carer? And Mary's mum looked at me and said, yes, I am. But there was clearly what I thought was these guys are having a bad day. Mary's been doing something. She's broken her limb. There's a kind of early adolescent thing. And I just didn't think anything more of it until I went upstairs to do the WHO check for the beginning of the list, where the theatre team, we all get together and we go over the cases, the equipment that's needed, any issues that might come up. And I said, the first patient, Mary with a fractured arm, and the orthopedic surgeon looked at me and said, oh, no, hang on, that's Richard. He's transgender boy. So it turns out this was actually a kid who was known as Richard, who's been living as Richard for the last year and a half. And it just made me think, oh my goodness, I've walked in there. No wonder they're having a bad day. And I felt like the biggest numpty in the world and part of a system that could let this happen. And this is going to be happening around the country. This is not just this is going to be happening in your local trust as well. So it got me thinking about if Richard came back to hospital next week, same thing would happen. He'd be forced to wear a wristband that says Mary. He'd have strangers coming up calling him Mary. And I just thought, I can't let this happen. This is awful. So it set me down this path. So when you go down to look at what people like to be known as and what people are called, there's not much published data out there. Now, there is a paper from Australia in a tertiary hospital when they looked at people and they said, what would you like to be known as? And they asked 300 adults and they found a third of their patients like to be known as something that's not their first formal forename. So, an Elizabeth who's a Lizzie or a Liz or a Betty, or someone who likes to use their middle name, or someone who you like to be known more formally, an elderly person as a Mr. or Mrs. or a Reverend or a Colonel, or there's so many permutations, and I'm sure you all know people like that. So since I've been doing this, I've also, not only the case I talked to you about, but there's other really significant cases I've come across which are really upsetting to hear about. Now, there's one case in our trust of a person who died being called the wrong name. There's someone I work with whose mother died at another local trust being called the wrong name. This poor person, she arrived at the hospital just after her mother died. They were preparing the body and the nursing staff were calling her mother by the wrong name. I've come across locked-in patients with locked-in syndrome on wards being called the wrong name. This is just awful that this could happen. Anyway, So the solution I came up with is about stickers and wristbands. #CallMe. So people traditionally in hospitals and healthcare settings, we've tried to address this in two other ways. Now you'll be aware that in some places we have headboards above beds. Now you can't have them in pediatric wards, you can't have them in obstetric wards, you can't have them in A&E. They don't follow the patients around the hospital. You can't have them in day case surgery units. They're of limited value, as are having recorded in the notes. And because sure enough, when I went back to look at Richard's notes, on page 9, there was a comment that said, likes to be known as Richard. Well, that's handy, but it's not really accessible. So it began with asking a lot of people a lot of questions, in-house and public consultations. So you can imagine when you do any change in the NHS, it's almost, I've just found out now, basically it's impossible. But anyway, I took it to Health Records Committee, I took it to Information Governance, I took it to public forums, adult forums, pediatric forums. I took it to nurses groups. I took it to Equality and Diversity. I took it to blood transfusion practitioners, which I'm sure any of you clinically based will realise how much of a stickler they are for detail. Laboratory heads, IT leads. I took it to trust management. And the reason I did this was to find out, is there any reason why we couldn't do it? But also to ask, look, is this going to have any impact at all on upstream or downstream services? Is this going to have any consequence that you guys can identify? So I got the clear to go ahead. Now, this is what the whole talk's about, really. On the top there, you'll see a mock-up of a sticker, and on the bottom there, you'll see a mock-up of a bracelet. So you'll see, now we've added a field that says call me, and what the person likes to be known as. Now, if you go on with call me, rather than prefers to be known as, or likes to be known as, or preferred name. And basically we've done this to keep the number of digits for call me. Well, call me is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kind of characters. So it gives you more space for what the person wants to be called. Now you'll see that it's kept away from the other identifying data. We've got it in a different, it's in italics. And it's to be kept separate from the other formal identifying data. We've had no issues with confusing a call me with a formal kind of entry for other reasons. There's no decrease in identifying data on the sticker or the bracelet. It's regulatory compliant. I think it's important to say as well. So we've gone with stickers and name bands. Here's an example of where we're using a sticker on a Muse chart. So stickers are kind of ubiquitous in healthcare systems. So whenever we see a patient in a hospital, generally whether that's nursing staff, it's an allied health professional, or doctors, or anyone really, quite often you're picking up a piece of paper, a request form, a drugs chart, a Muse chart, a set of notes, which will have this sticker on. So you're kind of forewarned of what the person likes to be known as. So I tend to address people now. I see you like to be known as, or Mike, clearly, as I go and see the patient to confirm that. Here's a mock-up of a name band. Call me Bob. Excuse this, not test. It says testing. It should be saying Robert, I imagine, or maybe Bob's his middle name. Who knows? Now, it's important that we put it on the wristband for a couple of reasons. First reason, we kind of think, first of all, it's a part of the patient's identity, forcing them to wear one. So you can imagine this poor kid that I saw originally, Mary, having forced to wear a name band that says Mary. That's just so wrong. But also, so it's showing the patients that we've taken the care to identify them as who they are, because that's how they identify themselves. But also, importantly, their family members. So you can imagine if you're in hospital, you've been called to A&E, and you've got a relative or who suffered a stroke or a heart attack or was having something kind of a significant episode in their life, and you're holding their hand, and it just identifies that we're calling them the way they want to be called is incredibly significant, I think. I think it's important to say this is not hello, my name is. People have said, well, isn't this just hello, my name is? Well, it is and it's not. I kind of think of it as a kind of a reciprocal. This is purely patient focused. I've had staff members say, well, can we not just call me on my letters and can we use it can the doctors have this call me phrase on other places as well? It's this is a purely patient focused drive. So the impact of this, you just have to think about it. It's quite significant, really. Really is simply about respect, compassionate care, personalized care, inclusivity. These poor patients. Now the impact. Now you think about certain groups of patients. where this is it has incredible significance. Elderly, confused, young kids who are only used by their first formal forename when they're in trouble. Well, there's a Bobby there, might have been a Robert or so forth. Confused patients. Now, can you imagine talking to a person if you're going by a different name and someone's shouting at you to try and wake up, answer questions, and they're talking to some other person? That's just wrong. A&E resus really important, I think, in this area because you couldn't be placed more like a fish out of water in your life to be transported into an A&E resus area, and just to find that everyone's calling you the right name is really significant. Post-operatively, now I'd hate to think of anyone that's ever worked a shift in a theatre suite or seen post-operative patients. I can't imagine there's any person who hasn't at one point woken up a patient, calling them the wrong name, and just assumed they're confused or they're demented or they don't know their own first name for some reason. It's kind of awful. And when you think about that's our grandparents, that's our relatives, these are people we've been calling the wrong name in the most awful situations. I think that's really not very nice. Culturally sensitive, I put down there. And the reason I put that down there is because we're living in an anglicised world. But our patient population is not all anglicised. I've got a great friend of mine called Alagaswamy Raj Kumar. He's a great bloke. Every aspect of his life is Raj. And he found, when I first launched this, he came to me and thanked me because he said whenever he's been in hospital, he's found it really upsetting that they call him Alagaswamy. He's never ever that he's Raj. So this is partly a project for Raj. So how do you do this? How do you launch it? Well, basically the rollout involved getting access to printers. We had 180 throughout our trust. We've got a 3 hospital site trust. We had to get access to 181 printers. It took 2 people 5 days to go around and physically kind of change the configuration of the printers and stickers. So it didn't take that too much to do. The rollout, the key to this is one of the keys, but until we got to the rollout, I think, is having the team to do it. So I struggled to get this thing going until I got a team of about 5 people, 1 person from patient engagement, 1 person from comms, 1 person from IT, and 1 person from quality assurance, and another clinician. So there's kind of a small team of us that were able to get this, to get moving. I don't think would have wanted any more people. There's a couple of images up there. The comms is really, really important. So comms are great because then you could imagine the things that they could do. So screensavers, advanced warning. We could target the areas we needed to target. Ward clerks, receptionists who are really pivotal in trying to get this launched. You'll see there's screensavers that we've got on the trust now where there's videos of how to input the data, which is a really, really simple thing to do. But it's a bit like, I don't know, using your credit card for the first time you do it, you think, oh my goodness, I'm never going to do this. And then as soon as you're done, it's 30 seconds of learning and then you can do it. But it's one of these things you have to be taught to do. So comms, really important. Small team, really important. Since we've launched, we've got a quality assurance hub in our trust. And so what we've got this REN reporting network. Basically every week we're uploading, there's ward checks where we're able to wards have to check 6 patients, and they also go and check 6 patients, co-check 6 patients on another ward, and they have a list of criteria they need to check, and so they're checking the call me's, whether they've been done, whether the patient's been called in the right name. And also off the system on the right page there, current inpatients, you'll see we're able to access on basically most wards, how many patients are having these things completed or not. That's been really helpful. How are we doing? Well, this is how we're doing. So 6 months down the now. This is from 5 months. We're now 6 months down. Now, hold on to your seat. We've done over 20,000 patients now, and we're confirming what the Australian study's shown. We've got 31% of our patients prefer to be known as something that's not their first formal forename. Now, when you come into the hospital in the NHS anywhere, the default is always for you to be called by your first formal forename. Not in our trust, hopefully. The cost. First question, this is cost so far, it's cost neutral. So The printers cost nothing to change. No change to the stickers, no change to the wristbands, nothing. It's cost nothing. We've done it all out of job plans from our normal work patterns. We've made 3 pull-up boards, which we've put around in the entranceway to the hospitals, which did cost 50 quid each, which came out of the comms kind of standard budget they have for all things. So this costs nothing. So where are we? Well, look, this thing's launched, but we're by no means there yet. This really involves a culture change throughout the whole trust, for everyone dealing with patients. And with hand on heart, I don't think we're there yet. We've got to focus on embedding more. So I can tell you these great numbers of 20,000, and they're great numbers, don't get me wrong, but there's also really high yield areas which we're struggling to get on board. So areas such as a trauma ward. So you can imagine a trauma ward being really important. Demented patients, elderly patients, generally a lot of patients going to theatre, patients moving around hospital. Getting them done has been a bit of an issue. A&E, another bit of an issue there. And that's basically because of the layout of A&E, the receptionist being removed from the general A&E nursing area, and just getting them to jump on board is a real struggle. We're getting there, I hope. Linking up with other service providers. Now you can see when a patient comes into our hospital via the ambulance service, currently they radio ahead the data and they'll say, look, I've got a Michael McCabe whose date of birth is kind of remarkable. He doesn't look he looks a lot older than he actually is, and they'll give a few basic data, and we'll print off stickers and name bands before the patient gets there. So we're trying to get the ambulance service to figure out how we can improve with that. So linking up with the ambulance service and other providers is we need to try and do that. IT. I put IT down here because the next steps. IT is really incredibly important in this. You'll be aware that we've all got this the digital care records coming along and the changes there. If this needs to be seen as a priority on the front page of any patient interaction, any patient screen, in my opinion, I'll add there, because it just needs to be a part of the culture of what the NHS does. The next steps help. I should have put an exclamation mark there. This is a small team I've started with, and it's great to launch it, but I'm needing help now to follow up with making use of data. So finding out of the 31%, for example, where we're doing it, who are these people, how can we make sure we're not missing anyone, and I've also put help there for physical follow-up. To capture these wards, the trauma ward, the A&E, I need help to try and get to these places. So I do need help to try and help get this embedded. So I'm trying to give you a balanced picture of where we are at the moment. Feedback we've had it's fine, isn't it? Look, it's good. It's going to be good, isn't it? So the Pediatric Public Forum, I put this one up because this is one of the first groups I went and saw. And they were a great group of kids, and it was a virtual meeting. And I'm just going to take you straight back down to the bottom line. And this 16-year-old kid, about 16, 15, he looked up, and at the end, he was a really quiet kid, and he sat there quietly, but I could tell he was nodding his head through the whole thing. And at the end, he said, "Excuse me, Dr. McCabe, could I put my preferred personal pronoun on there, please?" And I thought, fair play to you, son. Yeah, and the answer is yes. That's definitely. It just shows, I think, that this is a project which could and should develop with changing times. We haven't started with personal pronouns, but I'd like to think that that's something that we should be covering. Here's some more feedback. I mentioned about this first patient of mine. This is from the very first patient, because I contacted them to tell them what we'd done and ask if they might be telling the story. And this little kid said, "It's amazing to be a small part of a project which could literally mean the world to some people." I've got to tell you, when I started this project, it was after that case, and I just thought, how can I stop this ever happening again? And I'm really pleased that I've got as far as I've got so far. So I'm trying to take it out elsewhere, because I think this is a project which the benefit needs to be shared widely. It's just something that you can't tell people, and people cannot see the benefit of this. This is such a simple idea. This is such a barnstormingly, it's a simple idea that just needs to be taken forward. So we were lucky enough to get a BMJ award this year with it taking it forward, taking it there. And I think the judges' comments, I think, are really sensible. Call Me is an inclusive and patient-inspired project with potential to be rolled out across the health service. It's a memorable and positive digital innovation that's used to fuel a cultural change and to help patients to be seen as individuals and to feel cared for. So the two questions I've got for anyone listening here today is, why isn't every patient in the NHS addressed in the way they choose every time and everywhere? Simple question. And the next one, is there a simpler and cheaper idea that you've heard this year to improve patient experience? So that, in about 15 minutes, is Call Me, what we've done. Now, if you want to find out more, just kind of put in your Google on your computers, put showcase hyphen Call Me. That'll take you to there's a trust page, which has got the trust kind of official line, and there's a YouTube clip showing some patients and kind of probably give you a bit more detail than I've talked about today. There's a Twitter page that I've got, which I've just kind of put updating with the Call Me stuff. We've got some nice mentions from Phil Hammond. There's some stuff up there to Twitter away your time while you're sitting at the desk or in the kitchen or wherever you Twitter away, or if you do Twitter away. And that's basically, in a nutshell, #Call Me. So
perfect. Thank you. Really appreciate you coming along to talk about this today. I mean, I'm a huge fan of this project. I think it's, fundamentally something that should be embedded everywhere. I'd love to see a post at some point submitted to the Fab NHS webpage, and then we can share it, sharing this nationally as far as we can. And it is on my objectives of number one things we need to achieve as part of our EPR in Worcester. On the all scripts, we have a banner. There's going to be a banner across the top with personal details about the patient, and I want the personal pronouns and Call Me on that. So every page you go into on the EPR, you see that for the patient. First thing you see.
So Matt, can I ask you, do you think that's going to happen? Is there any resistance?
We write the program.
So there's no resistance.
So no, it will happen. We just need to make sure we get it right. In there that shouldn't be achievable, and it's such a fundamental thing it just has to be done. So can I open up to questions? Any questions from the group?
David has put a question on the chat room, Matt. I don't know if he wants to expand on that.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike, and thanks for inviting me to listen to you. It was it might seem a little bit trivial. It's not meant to be. How have you considered if someone decided that what they wanted to be known as was something that could be quite offensive? So there are, we do have some quite interesting characters. Now I know, for example, in New Zealand, legally, you can't be known as Adolf. Now in this country, there are no rules. So have you had anyone who's wanted to be known as something? Well, take your pick of some expletive or whatever. What would you be a guidance on that?
Okay. So my take on that, I have had that comment from some staff who said, well, you could call yourself anything you like, and I kind of personally, I think that's absolutely fine. If I went to hospital and I said I want to be called as Princess, well, you can put Princess on my band and I'll be called Princess. But I tell you what, after a day or two of being called Princess, I'll probably say, can you change it back? It's not that funny after all. Call me Mike. The comment about people calling themselves offensive names, we can't stop people being called what they want to be called, I think, in life. So I think that's something that's out of we can't tell people how they want to be called. If they want to be identified as Adolf in the UK and it's not against the law, I don't have a problem with that. I might be offended by it personally, but I think that's what they want to do and that's their right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I don't know what other people think.
No, I just want to say it's an amazing idea, because I work with the elderly people, and the number of people who are born Janice and like to be known as Queenie and Duchess, and you're completely trying to figure out where they've gone and how their names come up and who gets what, and quite often they've had strokes and they can't tell you, or have worked in recovery and been trying to wake up Janice, who's actually been Jacinda, and you're trying to figure out what's going on, or you've got Fred, who's been Fred for 5 days because nobody knew what his name was.
Yeah, and like I keep saying, I think that's someone's father, that's someone's relative. It's such an important thing to get right, and to know that we are getting it wrong, and there will be people dying in other trusts being called the right. My stories aren't just you. They don't. It's not that there's a circle around Worcester, or they don't happen elsewhere.
No, both myself and Donna have both worked in recoveries and ITUs, and we can both say the amount of times that we've referred to people with the wrong names when relatives come in, and you're thinking that's just because you go off what's on the notes, you go off the information, you think you're doing the best thing, but
it's also the patients sometimes change that, because my gran, when she was younger, when she was 60, 70, she was adamant she was a Mrs. Clark. You don't call her anything else, she's a Mrs. Clark. She's just come out of hospital now at 88. She's May now, because she's been I think she's part of this institutional, because no matter how many times she said she was Mrs. Clark, they still called her Mary. She hated Mary, so she said, call me May. And it's just kind of gone down that way, I think. But actually, if you were to meet her in the street and called her May, she wouldn't like it. She's definitely a Mrs. Clark, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
And when you phone up the ward to figure out who it is, you get looked at when you ask how Mrs. Clark is, because they don't know who she is.
Yeah. I think one of the other things to point out is it's not a compulsory field on our systems, and one of the things that needs to be a compulsory field, because there's quite a lot of staff that will say, as you can appreciate, so 2/3 of people are happy to be called by their first formal forename, and if you don't fill out the field, you don't know whether it's because they haven't asked or because they want to be known as that name. And one of the strong points I think personally is just the fact of asking someone how they'd like to be known as when they're in hospital is a very positive thing. It's just showing from the outset that, look, we want to call you the right thing, and if it is the first formal forename, that's absolutely fine. So in my perfect world, it'll be a compulsory field.
Kerry, you have a question? Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm Kerry Pace, and I have a company called Diverse Learners, and I am a FAB ambassador. And actually, I've just been talking about this with a trust earlier today on some awareness training I was doing for disability awareness training. And what we were talking about was the crossover and intersectionality of disability and the other 9 protected characteristics, including disability, under the Equality Act. And we were talking about the importance of calling people not by their anglicised name, but by their given name. And that's where culturally, if you're looking at BAME groups, you do get Duchess and Queen and Princess in those groups. And also in the way of referring to your own disability. So here I would bring in CRIP theory. And so, for example, I'm a person who has dyspraxia, ADHD, brittle asthma, and a huge long list, whereas my 25-year-old prefers to be called dyspraxic. And we were talking about, again, and I actually use that analogy of like, hello, my name is actually being referred to the name that you wish to be given, but also the same applies for disability, referring to the person with a disability in the way that they refer to their disability.